horror icon is always a tricky proposition, but it's something that Hollywood takes a swing at from time to time. This week we saw the debut of the new film Candyman, which attempts to revive the 1992 Tony Todd horror franchise. So, were they successful? Or should this one get pitched into the giant bonfire along with disasters like the Rob Zombie remake of Halloween? Let's find out on this Summer Express episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Hello again and welcome to this Summer Express episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, your place for a fun discussion of horror movies. I'm your host, Steve the Cat. Well, the countdown is underway and we will begin airing new Season 2 episodes of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat on Monday, September 20th. Some new episodes are already in the can and we're hard at work on finishing up the rest, but in the meantime, summer's not over yet, so we're going to squeeze in at least one more Express episode before the start of the new season. Tonight, we're going to talk about the brand new film from Nia DaCosta and Jordan Peele, Candyman. Now, before we go any farther, let's do a disclaimer. We're about to talk about a horror movie, and that will involve the discussion of violent, frightening, and disturbing content. This video is intended only for audiences over the age of 18. Viewer discretion is advised, and sensitive viewers are advised to stop watching now. So, now that the disclaimer is out of the way, Candyman, of course, is a legendary horror film from 1992, starring Tony Todd and Virginia Madsen. Based upon a short story by Clive Barker, Candyman tells the story of Daniel Robitaille, a 19th century African-American artist who was wrongfully and horrifically murdered by a lynch mob after falling in love with the daughter of a wealthy white Chicago industrialist. In the film, we learn that the mob sawed off Robitaille's hand, his painting hand, and replaced it with a metal hook, and then smeared honeycomb from nearby beehives all over his body and allowed the bees to sting him to death, thus giving birth to the nickname Candyman. Robitaille's body was burned, and the ashes scattered over what would later become Chicago's Cabrini Green housing projects, leading to the area becoming haunted by Robitaille's spirit. The legend says that if anyone looks in a mirror and says Candyman 5 times, the Candyman will appear and kill you with his hook. The new film is a direct successor to the original film. It is not a remake or a reboot. It is a new film that takes place in the same cinematic universe almost 30 years after the original film. In this film, much of what used to be the Cabrini Green housing projects have become an upscale, gentrified neighborhood. Now, I assume this has happened for real. I've not been to Chicago since the 1990s, so I have no first-hand experience, but assuming Chicago has evolved similarly to the cities I'm familiar with on the East Coast, I find this entirely believable. Anyway, in the film, a young artist named Anthony, who is struggling to find new inspiration for his work, becomes intrigued by the Candyman legend and makes it the centerpiece of his new collection, which is then displayed in a local art show at the gallery curated by his girlfriend Brianna. Anthony thus inadvertently revives the Candyman legend, with tragic and bloody results. So what's the bottom line on this film? I found it to be okay but not great, and I walked out of the theater feeling more disappointed than anything else. It's not a bad film, but for me it kind of fell apart in the second half and left me feeling like it should have been better than it was. I am a big fan of the original Candyman, so I went into this with a bit of nervous anticipation. Nervous because I was afraid they might screw it up, but excited about the possibility of getting a really great revival like the 2018 version of Halloween. What I got was neither. On the one hand, there are a lot of parts of this film that are really excellent, so I can't say it's a bad film, and I can't say I'm sorry I watched it. On the other hand, I ultimately found the film to be very predictable, with an ending that bordered on incoherent yet somehow managed to be entirely foreseeable at the same time. Let's start out by talking about some of the things I really liked about this film. Number 1, it's not a reboot or a remake. It's a continuation of the original Candyman cinematic universe. Virginia Madsen does not make a visual appearance in this film, but she does do some voice work for the film. You have Anthony going through Helen Lyle's old audio tapes while researching the Candyman legend, and there's Virginia Madsen's voice right there. Also, Vanessa Williams, who was in the original film, does make a return appearance in this film, so they made multiple efforts to maintain the connection with the original film. They did not go the route Rob Zombie went with his Halloween remake of completely revamping the backstory, which is why so many people hate Rob Zombie's remake of Halloween. They stayed very loyal to the source material, except in the parts where they didn't, which I will talk about in a minute. Nevertheless, I'm going to rant about that in a minute, but nevertheless, I will give them credit for attempting to do a continuation of an existing franchise rather than just steal the title and slap it on something brand new. Number 2, the film is very well acted with very good production values. The cinematography is excellent, and the film just looks really, really good on screen. The characters are likable, at least the ones that are supposed to be likable, and they have reasonably well-developed backstories. Number 3, there are some good elements of tension and suspense throughout the film, and especially I thought the Candyman's first appearance at the art gallery was particularly well done. And finally, number 4, I found the film to be really interesting visually at various parts. Since the Candyman legend is so tied with reflections and mirrors, the film makes a lot of use of not just reflections and mirrors, but innovative camera angles as well. There are some particularly interesting images early in the film, at least I thought so, that have the feel of looking down on the city from a helicopter, but they're actually shot from ground level looking upward, with the tops of the skyscrapers fading into the fog, or at least that's what I thought. Looking at it, that's what my brain said. So it really drives home the theme of mirror images and the feel of being on the other side of a mirror. Now that we've talked about the things I liked about the film, let's talk about a few of the things that I thought could have been done better. Number 1, overall the film is predictable. I'm going to talk about a few more aspects of that in a minute. For now, let's just say you're not going to walk out of this film saying, wow, I did not see that coming. Number 2, my experience with Jordan Peele films is that I usually enjoy the first half, but then they get too convoluted in the second half, and that was my experience with this film as well. There are 2 twists in this film, and for the sake of your viewing pleasure, I'm going to try to not spoil them for you. What I will say is that one of them was very predictable, at least if you're familiar with the original film, and I'm not sure that you can even call it a twist. As far as the other, it struck me as borderline nonsensical. You had a character that Anthony only encountered by chance, who ended up having a huge role in the film, and it just feels too coincidental. In the past, I've said you can often give supernatural films a pass when they rely too heavily upon coincidences to keep the story moving, because you can argue that there are supernatural forces at work, bringing things together. And I suppose you can apply that thinking here, although I would like the filmmakers to actually do just something in the film to at least imply that that's what's happening. Now, in fairness, I did have to sprint to the litter box quickly in the film's second half, so maybe I missed a critical piece of information while I was out. But based upon what I've read from other reviews and Wikipedia and so forth since I got back, I don't see that I really missed any critical pieces of information. Number 3, the special effects in the film are uneven. The conventional blood and guts part of the special effects is done as conventional practical special effects, and they look very, very good. But the film also tries to do some innovative things visually, such as only being able to see certain events when they occur in a mirror, and it ends up looking very computer graphic-y and fake. There's one scene where you see Candyman kill a victim inside a high-rise condominium, and you see it through an outside window, and the killing happens as the camera is pulling away from the outside window in a helicopter shot, and it's a really, really interesting idea, but it ends up looking very, very fake. Number 4, the filmmakers were loyal to the source material, except in the areas where they changed it completely. In this film, we learn about a different Candyman legend, one involving a character named Sherman Fields, who was wrongfully murdered by the Chicago police. The film goes on to establish a mythology where Daniel Robitaille was the first Candyman, but there have been many others, representing African American men who have been wrongly murdered throughout history. Now, obviously, this was done in an effort to tie the film together with a larger narrative about social justice, and putting aside the political realities of that for a moment, and looking at it purely within the context of the universe of the Candyman films, to me it becomes problematic when you look at the timeline of the movies. According to this new film, Sherman Fields was killed by the police in 1977, and after that, he became the murderous spirit of Candyman who would appear and butcher anyone who said Candyman 5 times while looking in a mirror. The problem of this is that the original film takes place in 1992, 15 years or so after Sherman Fields was murdered, and yet there's no mention of him or any of the other Candymen in the original film or the two sequels. It's something that the current creative team made up and inserted into the Candyman legend. Now, some will argue that this was a necessary and important change and that there was a need to tie the film to larger themes about social justice. Others are going to argue that you're retroactively changing the underlying legend of a classic horror story for the sake of suiting a current day agenda, and that if you want to make a modern horror movie with a social justice theme, you should create something new rather than tampering with something that already exists. Now, that is a philosophical discussion. People are going to have strong opinions, and that's not something I want to try to tackle here. That is not something we should try to settle in an express film review hosted by a talking cat. My personal objection is of a more practical nature. Putting aside whether you like the more expansive Candyman legend, putting aside whether you believe it was a necessary change, in my opinion, they did not do a good job of integrating this new legend with the existing Candyman universe. If you were to watch the 1992 film and then watch the new film back to back, it would feel like somebody built an addition onto an existing house but made no effort to match the addition to the style of the original, so you have two mismatched pieces that are connected but don't really go together. Now, I've said earlier that this film is not a remake or a reboot. It is a continuation of the original Candyman storyline, and that is true. However, it feels like when this project first started, you had one screenwriter who came up with a story that was a continuation of the original legend, and you had another screenwriter who came up with a different story that effectively rebooted the Candyman legend to be something a little different involving many different Candymen, and the final product is an inexpert blending of the two. Now, I believe the filmmakers could have made a film that integrated this new legend together with the original film in a way that works harmoniously, but unfortunately that is not the film I saw. Now, maybe the filmmakers didn't want to focus on that, or maybe they did and the studio cut it out for the sake of time, or maybe they cut it out because they thought it made the film too complex. Regardless, if you're a fan of the original, you may find yourself scratching your head at the direction the legend is taken in the new film. If you're a younger fan and this is your introduction to Candyman, it likely won't bother you. Last point, number 5, you should know going in that the film is overtly political. Now, there's nothing wrong with making political films. There's a long history of making political points in films. I have no objection to the makers of Candyman using it as a vehicle for a larger message about social justice. What I will say is that in addition to causing the film to not mesh perfectly with the original, like we just talked about, the politics of this film just made it even more predictable for me. Let's be honest, horror movies are often formulaic and they can end up being very predictable, so you've got that going against you going in. In the case of Candyman, the political themes that were incorporated into the film and the images that were incorporated into the film were exactly what I expected to see before I ever set foot in the theater, so that made it even more predictable for me. So instead of a horror movie with a political subtext, it felt like I was watching a political statement with the veneer of a horror movie wrapped around it. Now, your reaction to the film will vary depending upon your attitudes and your expectations going into the film. A lot of you will find the overriding social justice message very timely and very important, and the overt politics of it won't bother you in the slightest. On the other hand, if you're going in looking for a piece of escapist entertainment, you may find the politics intrusive or distracting. Now, the film's politics are not subtle, and because they're not subtle, my gut says, or my concern, I should say, is that the film is more likely to entrench people farther into their pre-existing positions than it is to cause anyone to reevaluate their views of the world. I could be wrong about that, we shall see. So, in summary, Candyman is a decent film, but one that I ultimately found to be disappointing. On the upside, it is well made, well acted, looks good on screen, and it is loyal to the source material, except in the parts where it isn't. On the downside, I found it predictable, thought it had a confused ending, and thought that the film's change to the Candyman legend was poorly integrated with the film's overall continuity. Now, not a criticism, but just a point for awareness. Be aware that the film is overtly political in a way that will appeal to a lot of people, but may feel intrusive if you're just looking for an escapist horror movie. That's all a matter of personal philosophy. For me, I would give the film 2 paws out of 4. I'm not unhappy that I saw it, but in hindsight, I wish I had spent $3 to rent it from a Redbox machine rather than $15 to see it at the theater. Well, that wraps up this special Summer Express episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy the show, please check us out on Facebook and give us a like and a share and maybe subscribe and follow. As the kids say, smash that bell. You can find us on Facebook at Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. And yes, that's Tales with an A-I-L-S. Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat appears exclusively on PBDC TV, your nightly heartbeat of horror. Whether you're interested in horror movies, true crime, weird history, cryptids, or unexplained events, we're sure to have something for you on PBDC TV. If you're not familiar with PBDC TV, don't worry, it's easy to find. We're on the World Wide Web at pbdctv.com, and we're on YouTube at PsychoBunnyDC. We've also got a large presence on Facebook. You can find the mothership at PBDC TV, or you can go directly to dedicated pages for Psycho Bunny Death Cult, Psychomandium 13, Roots Bleed Red, and Cemetery Kids Fright Theater. No matter what you're interested in, we're going to have something for you. Just another reminder that new episodes of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat will begin on Monday, September 20th at 10 p.m. Eastern, with a live watch party on the Psycho Bunny Death Cult Facebook page. New episodes will premiere every Monday at 10 p.m. and will carry you all the way through to the end of the year. And if you missed the live premiere, don't worry. You can catch a replay on the Psycho Bunny Death Cult Facebook page or the PBDC TV YouTube page. Thank you once again for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the show. Everyone stay safe and have a great week. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
This is Mikey from Out of the Ordinary, and you're watching PBDC TV.
Oh, hi! First thing in the morning, when I'm listening to music and getting a little bit of time for some creepy research, I'm always representing with my PBDC merch. What a better way to have a cup of coffee in the morning.
Don't forget to check out our other cool merch at rootsbleedred.com. That's rootsbleedred.com.
This is Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus from Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, and when I'm not hosting Monster Chat or knocking down small Japanese cities, I'm watching PBDC TV. Now back to the show.